Today in Corinne's pick, we have Don Perlis. Hi, we have part 2 of an interview with extraordinary man, Don Perlis. Thank you for letting me do a second episode.
Thank you for having me.
I did want to mention in this episode, because we've talked at length about some of your works. I did want to mention that your work can be seen at Denise Bibro Gallery in the city.
It's on 20th Street.
You can see that live.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful body of work, and definitely something that don't rely on the TV monitor, but to do get opportunity and see the paintings. I know we ran out of time the last time we were exploring your work. Let's get into some more.
Sure.
We were still we're talking about Donald Trump and talking about European art traditions and how you're basically using those techniques, but the subject matter is New York City.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's look at a slide and let's have you do most of the talking.
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, yes. This is a small picture actually, and I did a larger one, but this was the study. A study is a small sketch that you make for a larger painting. And I was actually making a comment about the Me Too movement in this, and which had just broken, and there was a lot of feminine anger around, and so what it brought to mind was the Medusa, and so how do you make a modern Medusa, and then but you don't really want to make a Medusa because Caravaggio already made a great Medusa, and there's other Medusas. So I put 2 small men in the painting, actually. And I made the angry female image direct her anger toward the 2 small men, and that's what that is about.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was also an experimented scale, too, because I usually don't make large heads like a lot of painters do, but in this case there was a reason to.
But it's also the elephant in the room. The Me Too movement is getting some pushback because there's some people feel that it's a little bit out of control, and that some people are losing careers without even going to trial, or without even even going before a court. People are just having employers just wipe out a whole decades and decades of work. So it's definitely something that is going to be in the public, I guess, discourse for a while. I guess it's new, and we're trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. The degree of passion is so deep, and it's probably so ancient also, besides it being deep. I mean, the story of the war between the sexes is not something that happened in 1995 or 2005. It's something that's, been going on since Greek mythology. There's a famous theme of the Amazons, in Greek art, and so the feelings, whatever they are, and they are extensive, run very deep, and they're prescient. They're very fresh now, and so the poor men who've tried to mitigate the situation, some of them, some actors, I forget the names of some of the people, have gotten kind of excoriated because they've tried to mitigate it, and because the anger is so deep that some people feel that that the anger is 100% justified. Some people feel like it's 50% justified, 75% justified, and so there's all these different levels of passion about the whole thing. And then there's also people who've really done things that are really incredibly, I would say, criminal. Really, I mean, close to murder with rape. And then there are people who've done things that are way at the other end of the scale. So, because of the intensity of the passion, it's tended to take people at both ends of the scale and put them in the same box. And the reason that is, I guess, is because some people feel, rightly or wrongly, that it's the attitude behind what both actions have been, whether it be something mild or something extreme. It's the attitude that's really what the problem is. Not the attitude is really more of a problem than the actual degree of guilt of the person. Somebody who does something like that could be fairly mild, or somebody who does something that's criminal. So, but certainly it's kind of, and from my point of view, I think I'm not comfortable with things that are divisive. I mean, I'm much more. Harmony has its place, and so does conflict.
Well, what I like about your art is that
Yeah.
you take on these controversial subjects, because art isn't really, it's decorative, but I like the fact that your art is social, it's political, that you do deal with these issues. So let's look at another one, because I do want to make sure we get to a number of them before we go to break.
Oh, yes. I'm trying to date this, if I can look back. I believe it was from the 80s, and maybe 85, something like that, 85 or 86. And it's a self-portrait. The trains at that time were completely covered with graffiti. So much where you couldn't look out the window. And they were scary. The subways were scary. And there were a lot of homeless people also everywhere. And nobody seemed to care. And I think I dressed myself like that, in very formal kind of suit and a hat, almost a caricature of somebody who was very conservative, in order to set off the background, to contrast it with the background. And I was also going through some crises in my own personal life. So the mood of the painting reflects the psychology, of the confusion that I was probably feeling at the time. There's a film on my work that's on YouTube that goes into some of that more deeply, and it's called Don Perlis, New York Painter, and anybody who goes to YouTube can see it. It's an 18-minute film that was done in 1994, but it goes into the background of this a little bit more deeply.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at the next image.
Yeah. Yes. This was I also from about the same time. This is it's in a really nice museum in Connecticut called Seven Bridges. This painting, and I've got about 7 or 8 works of mine in that particular museum. And this painting was also it was at the end of the series of New York paintings that I made at the time, and it was a quieter painting of it, and it's called Waiting, and the woman is waiting for a train, and there's a feeling of expectation, I hope, which is, I think, successful. And if you look in the corner in the left, in the back, there's a whole pile of homeless men.
Oh.
Actually, against the wall, sleeping. And so here's a lone person, and on a subway station at night. And I had an experience myself where I was actually in Bedford Avenue in Brooklyn, where I was waiting for a train, and there were some kids with guns, and they surrounded me. And then, just as a kid was going to go into this paper bag and pull out a gun, 2 trains came in, and it saved me. And then the kids disappeared. But this happened to me, and so that film, I mean that painting was like a kind of a. I had that a little bit in the back of my mind when I was doing this. How scary it is, you know.
So when we get to the paintings
Yeah.
of the Bernard Getz issues, we should revisit that.
Oh yes, sure.
Okay,
Sure.
so let's look at the next one.
Yeah. This is a painting that's about 12 feet high. It's 96.
Oh, okay.
Well, actually, it's 96 inches, so it's about 8. I guess that would be 8 feet, 96. I'm not sure because I'm very bad at math. But I did another painting of this scene after the kids had gotten shot, and then I also did a painting that I really love called Homeboys. I don't know if you picked that, but it's 3. I really love that
The
painting.
triptych.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. It's a painting of kids on the subway giving
Oh,
giving
right,
each other a high
homeboys.
five.
Right.
And this and that painting, it's like a diptych. They go together. They're about the same height, and so it's like before and after, actually. And the diptych of Homeboys, the original, it's right before they saw Getz and then provoked him, actually. So, and that's a painting of him being provoked.
So we have
Yeah.
3 minutes until we get to the commercial break.
Yeah.
But that
Maybe people don't even remember Getz.
those paintings of the Bernard Getz issue are big. I mean, that issue.
Yeah.
A lot of people might not have experienced New York during that time period, but
Yeah.
I think I was in college
Yeah.
during that time,
Yeah.
and I know that even I know my father, Roy Innes, got a lot of flack because he was on the side of Bernard Getz. Basically, said that this guy had been robbed repeatedly, and that drove him to that issue. But however, the black community was not happy with that, and Bernard Getz getting off.
Right.
So that was a really
I remember actually.
heavy issue,
Yeah.
and the fact that you captured that in paintings. I mean, when
Yeah.
I saw that, it just brought back that whole
Yeah.
that whole era. I mean, we have 2 minutes until we go to break, but if you could just talk a little bit more about
Oh yes.
your
Yeah.
perspective on that issue.
Well, I was looking for a subject, and Manet did some great paintings of the execution of Emperor Maximilian of Mexico. Goya did the 5th of May. There's a whole tradition in Europe of making history paintings that are based on events that galvanize the society at the time that they're living in. And I wanted to do that, and I was looking for a subject matter that did that. And I like controversy because it makes for drama. And I'm a painter, and I'm looking for that. And I'm a representational painter, a figurative painter. So at the same time, I was also emotionally drawn into the subject because I'm a New Yorker. So it was very real to me, all of it. I remember your dad. I remember the stance he took, and I remember the controversy. I remember all of it, actually, like yesterday. And even though I can't even remember the exact year, I have a vivid memory of it all.
The early 1980s, 81, 85.
Yeah. And I did a lot of paintings of there was a lot of racial incidents at the time that were very galvanizing, and there was a lot of tension between the races in New York, and it was really stressful. And to native New Yorkers who were used to living in a diversified community, like most of us are, it was especially disturbing because all of a sudden your neighbors were giving you dirty looks, and all of a sudden the comfortable environment that you were in made everybody uncomfortable because it was almost like somebody pointing to something and saying, "Hey, look, there's an elephant in the room, that nobody talks about," and all of this stuff exaggerated and accelerated. I actually met Getz years later, and there was a bookstore near my old studio, and Getz was actually looking at. Somebody came up, and they told me to go down and meet him. And I ran down to the bookstore, and I actually had the Getz paintings on the wall in my studio. And I ran down, and I had an appointment And I couldn't, and I said, man, I wanted you to come up because I just made paintings of you. And he looked at me like I was out of my mind. And I had an appointment. And I said, I can't really do it now because I have to go somewhere. And I missed showing Getz the paintings of himself. And
So-
yeah,
We're going to go to a break. When we come back, we'll talk some more about the Bernard Getz issue.
okay. Yeah.
Before we went to commercial break, we were talking about your painting about the Bernard Getz issue.
Yeah.
And you was basically explaining the time period.
See them.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything about that issue in recent years. And you did mention like that the racial climate in New York during that time period was very
Was tense.
very
Yeah.
intense.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It was awful, actually.
So we have 10 minutes left before we end the show. So I want to make sure we get through some more images.
Yeah.
So let's go to the next image.
One thing I'd like to say,
Uh-huh.
you know, if I can, is like there are a lot of people making representational paintings today. I don't use photographs. I use live models, and I use drawing, and I make up compositions. So it actually gives my work a classical basis that is unlike most representational painting that's being practiced, and including these particular works.
How did you get, who was the model for Bernard Getz? How did you stage that image? Because I know people don't realize that you're actually staging even the Times Square images with Donald Trump. Those, those are all models.
They're all models in the
Elmo's
studio.
a model. You have Elmo outfits and the
they're all made
Wonder
up
Woman.
in the studio, right?
Yeah.
They're all made up. Yeah, I do a little paint sketch of the composition from my imagination. I get costumes.
Right.
I hire models, use them one at a time, and I work up a large painting from the sketches and the drawings and the small sketches that I make, and then from working from the model. And then I pull it all together after everybody leaves, and I work from imagination. But I don't use photographic reference because I want to get a feeling in my paintings of real immediacy, where I'm not having in between. I don't want anything in between me and the world except a paintbrush. I don't want to have a manufactured image in between me and the image that I'm making up.
Right.
I want to have me and then the image that I'm making up and the world. Me and the world and the image.
Right.
Which is the way it always was done. And I think, I think something's been lost because has not been understood. So we can just, okay?
Okay.
So, yeah.
So do you have the next image, please?
Oh, this is
that's
the
the
triptych
triptych,
of
yeah,
the whole. Yeah,
yeah.
this is the whole. This is the. This is the painting. The triptych I call incident because it's a kind of an it's a minimal name. You know, just to describe a horrendous incident. Just. Without making an elaborate name, so I named it something just like that. Anyway, it's a triptych, and it's meant to be shown together, and it's even the time sequence is almost like before, middle, and before, during, and after. And before, you have a crowded train with a homeless man who's crippled, who's begging, filled with New Yorkers. In the middle panel, you have Getz after he shoots these boys, and there were 4 of them. I only put 3 of them in the painting, and there's an old lady who's horrified by it. And then he jumps out of the car door onto the tracks, and the painting is tilted. It's so that it's kind of, it gives you a feeling of not being balanced, you know, the way trains, and that's deliberate. Whereas the 2 right panels are more vertical and horizontal. The middle panel is skewed because it increases the movement.
So how did you stage this? Because this is not from a photograph. How did you stage these?
None of my
images?
paintings are from photographs, and they were all made up out of my mind, and they were all done from sketches. I make dozens of small things from my head before I even think
So
of.
you had a model laying on the floor?
Well,
and
when I finally did the big painting, I hired people. I had kids come to the studio, pose for the kids who were shot. I had an old lady come and pose for that. I had a boy pose for Bernard Getz. The people in the paintings on the right panels and on the left panels are all portraits. They're all people I knew, and they're all posed on the subway. Some of them have died. Some of them I've forgotten their names. And in the third panel on the right, I'm in there, pointing. So there's a blonde lady, and I'm pointing like that.
Okay, before we go, we have 5 minutes left of
Yeah.
this segment until we end the show. Before we get to the next image, I do have to give you a little poke. That reminds me of the big issue of today. I guess Bernard Getz was the first big issue, but that would have been called Stand Your Ground rule. Because
Right.
that incident has repeated
Yes, it has.
in this country.
It has, yes.
For even lesser incidences in terms of even when people haven't been taunting
Right,
someone.
right.
So, but now,
Yeah. It's an old idea. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it goes back to a guy with a shotgun and a guy with a shotgun, right? He was defending his
Right.
daughter. I mean, it's an old, and it's true. These things are, they're primordial. These issues. And representational painting can touch on these things.
but in the South,
Yeah.
there's always a racial element when if it's 2 white people or 2 black people.
Yeah.
It doesn't hit national news. But when it's the shooter is white and the
Oh yeah.
the
Oh,
person
yeah.
who's
Oh, yes.
dead is black,
Yes.
basically the racial tensions come into play.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look, since we have 5 minutes left, let's get
Sure.
to the next image.
Sure. Yeah, this is Howard Beach, where they chased this kid onto the highway, and he got hit by a car, I believe, if I
He
can
did,
remember.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh-huh.
And these are these kids from Howard Beach, which is a very kind of racist area
Mm-hmm.
where there's a lot of, it's a kind of a, they have 1 or 2 ethnic groups there, and the culture is racist in the area.
Was it Italian? Italian,
Italian,
neighborhood?
Irish. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure at the time. I used to know. I don't remember anymore.
And
Actually,
listening to NPR this
yeah,
weekend, there was an interview basically celebrating that during this time period, "Do the Right Thing" came out with Spike Lee's
yeah, yeah,
film about tensions in New York City.
yeah.
So that reminds me of that movie.
I also remember
Right.
because I was a kid in New York, and I grew
Right.
up during times when were not that pleasant, and even when I went to this high school that I was talking to you about, which was art and design, which was called the High School of Industrial Art. I was telling you in our previous conversation one time that all the ethnic groups in the school would hang around with each other. I mean, they wouldn't mix. So, I mean, we had something called lunchtime dancing, actually, in my school. And the black kids would be in one corner, and the Irish kids would be in another corner, the Jewish kids would be in another corner, the Italian kids would be in another corner. And nobody mixed. And a lot of neighborhoods in New York are like that. And these kids are ignorant. They're not just, the racism in a way it's a word that, like sexism and like ageism, like all those ism words, that didn't really take hold, those kind of words, until much later. Although, in other words, like a lot of those kids in those neighborhoods didn't hate each other. I'm talking about all the different ways. It's just they grew up in societies that were almost like little countries that were so nepotistic that they didn't have any knowledge of any other cultures. So it's what you're talking about is ignorance. It's not only racism, but it's ignorance. I'd even say some of the kids even got carried along because of peer pressure and did terrible things because they're just kids. I'm not letting any of them off the hook. I'm just thinking back when I was a teenager and how stupid kids are and how ignorant they are. And they do stupid things. And it's not necessarily because of hate. A lot of it is because of ignorance and nepotism, and it goes across the board.
Okay, so we've
Yeah.
run out of time.
Yeah,
We have about 30 seconds left.
yeah.
I do want to thank you for being on the show. We definitely need to continue to look at your work. I'm a huge fan. Thank you so much for being on this episode.
Well, thank you, Corinne.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for having me. Yeah.
Okay.